Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us today. First, let me introduce you. I am Dr. Hebatallah, Associate Professor of Economics and Academic Dean at Jindal School of International Affairs and the Executive Director of Jindal Centre for the Global South. Today, I am going to be responsible for moderating our virtual gathering on the topic of Latin America post-COVID-19 pandemic, regional socio-economic implications and policy pathway to recovery. And in our today international webinar, our center is really lucky to have got acceptance from experts from three countries, and they are going to cover 4 Latin American countries. So we are having today Colombia, Peru, Mexico, and Brazil. So we are starting this first session with Colombia and Peru, and the second session is going to be focused on Mexico and Brazil. We are pleased to have with us in this first session 2 experts from Latin America, Professor Nelson López and Mr. Mack Cleam. Professor Nelson López is Assistant Professor at University of Los Andes in Colombia. He is also Academic Director at ELAB, European Center of Human and Social Studies in Spain. He has more than 8 years of experience in the public and private sector, and he has wide experience in applying tools for the formulation and evaluation of investment projects and public policies. Our second expert from Latin America, from Peru, Mr. Mack Cleam, Pena. He is business lawyer on mergers and acquisition, transactions, and corporate matters. He is also international lecturer in Amity Law School in India. He is a specialist in corporate finance and law, investment banking, and Austrian economics. His academic research interest is focused on law and economics, and Austrian, especially Austrian economics. We are going to break this first session into 2 parts. The first part is going to be dedicated to the presentation that is going to be given by our 2 guest speakers, and then we'll move to the last section, which is the Q&A session. And this session is going to be recorded, or it is recorded, and it is going to be available online on our official YouTube channel. So now starting first by Professor Nelson Fabian. He is going to share with us his expert opinion on the impact of COVID-19 on Colombia and the actions implemented by the national government and the policy recommendations. Professor Nelson.
Thank you so much. I will going to show my presentation. Can you see my presentation now?
Yes, I think. Yes.
Okay, give me a second, please. Okay, it is better. Yes? Can you see?
Yes, yes, perfect.
Okay.
Yes, perfect.
Thank you. I apologize for my level of English because it is not the best, but I will try to do my best. First of all, I want to say thanks to Jindal Global University, Jindal Centre for the Global South, Jindal School of International Affairs, and of course, Dr. Heba, for inviting me as a guest speaker to participate in this seminar on Latin American economics. The topic we will talk about today is challenges of the economic and social reactivation in Colombia. Today we are going to talk about challenges that are facing Colombia post-COVID-19, thinking of possible remedies, how do we expect COVID-19 to impact the dynamic of the Colombia and our economy, and what's the future outlook for our country. So during this session, we are going to talk about 4 topics. The first one is the context of COVID-19. The second has to do with the actions implemented by the national excuse me. Wait a second. Excuse me. The second has to do with the actions implemented by the national government, and third shows the routes of actions that the government took, and finally we will talk about some public policy recommendations. At the beginning, the COVID-19 pandemic appears as a shock that has affected the world economy. According to the University of Hopkins, the figures for diagnosis and deaths showed in the middle of the month of July 2020, more than 13 million people had been diagnosed with the disease and more than 500,000 deaths. Faced with this situation, the countries have implemented different health, economic, and social measures in order to control the contagion rate and soften the economic impact of this crisis. The dilemma implies thinking about a balance between the objectives of public health and those of the stability of the economy and the well-being of families and households. In Colombia, with this reality, the governments at the national and subnational level have modeled different responses of public policy to face the negative effects of the pandemic and subsequent quarantine. For example, mitigation measures can be classified into first, health and emergency sanitary measures; second, social, economic, and ecological emergency measures; and third, public order measures and others of ordinary nature. Based on different combination of these type of measures, the national government and local governments have to reduce infections, strengthen the hospital structure, and support the population most affected by the confinement measures. The lack of a history of a pandemic of this magnitude makes policy decision-making difficult and increase uncertainty about the degree of impact on the economic activity in the country. As you can see on the map, according to the World Health Organization, in Colombia, as of June 5, 1,900,955,505 vaccines have been applied. In these graphs, you can see, on the one hand, the total number of confirmed cases that amounts to 172,956,039. And on the other hand, the total number of deaths caused by the virus that amounts to 3,726,466. In this comparison, it can be seen that the region most affected by the virus has been America, as confirmed cases amount to 68,533,720. Second, Europe, with 54,625,827. For example, Africa, with 3,563,825, and the less affected region is Western Pacific, with 3,157,663. Now, In this picture, it can be seen that both America and Africa had a strong peak in January of this year, while Saudi Asia and Eastern Mediterranean had a peak in April, and Europe and the Western Pacific had a peak in both January and April. In Colombia, in addition to the pandemic, social protests have been taking place since last April 28 as a consequence of a generalized nonconformity of the citizenship towards the national government. These are basically the 6 main points: tax reform, second, unemployment, third, health reform, access to higher education, insecurity and violence, economic crisis. In total, until today, 45 days of protests. In this sense, social protests have led to numerous cases of violence. 58 homicides by Defensoría del Pueblo, 20 homicides by Fiscalía, 2 institutions in charge of clarifying cases of violence, Defensoría del Pueblo and Fiscalía, 2 institutions, and 111 disappearances of people, 211, 214 imputations of charges. Additionally, the social protests have led 74 assurance measures, 62 smudge gas stations affected, 242 banks affected, 107 ATMs affected, 40 toll roads affected, 360 stolen supermarkets, 2 dead police officers, 1,192 wounded police officers, 141 police stations affected, and 507 patrols of service. This is the panorama that the protests have left until today. 45 days of protests in Colombia. That it has been a difficult situation. Difficult situation for the police, for the citizens, for the government, and this is so difficult for the economic and social point of view of the people in Colombia. Now, we will talk about some actions implemented by the national government in the pandemic. First, the timeline of some measures taken by the national government in the face of the health emergency. This is at the beginning, on March 2020. At the beginning, some actions implemented by the government. Mandatory quarantine of 14 days for travelers. A state of health emergency until May 30. Public events of more than 50 people was cancelled. Border closure until May 30. And $250 million credit line for the tourism, aviation, and entertainment sector. Restrictions of entry to the country to non-nationals and non-residents. Credit for agricultural producers. Mandatory quarantine until April 13. Suspension of domestic flights, intermunicipal and municipal transport, land transport. Announcement of social program measures. Possibility of deferring the payment of electricity and gas bills to 36 months. And start the tax refund, support the cultural sector, payment of social security for the older people in this sector. On April 2020, rules of private law applicable to purchases in the international medical devices, market and personal protection elements, credit to support affected sector, Mandatory quarantine runs until April 26. It is suspended, tax payment on mobile plans, suspension of the terms of expiration of all permits and documents of migrants. Solidarity tax decrees are issued for public workers. Tax is eliminated for imports and sale of 211 medical goods. Reconnection of water service to households that is suspended. Mandatory quarantine is extended until May 11. The construction and manufacturing sectors are reactivated. And second phase of solidarity income. On May 2020, the consumption tax paid by the restaurants until December 2020. Mandatory quarantine is extended until May 31. Next, inclusion of new beneficiaries of the solidarity income. And finally, financial aid is announced to pay the premium of workers with salaries of up to 1 million pesos per month for employers with financial difficulties in companies that have had decrease at less 20% of your income. On June last year, the 1st of June, distribution of 500,000 assets for testing COVID-19 diagnosis in 20 states of the country. Tax exemption for tourism and hotel services, restaurants, bakeries, pastry shops, money transfer not conditional to dependent workers who are applied for the support program for formal employment. On July, mandatory social distancing. August 2020, mandatory individual social distancing. This is some actions that have implemented by the national and subnational governments in Colombia. These actions, according to the aforementioned, the action implemented by the national government were focuses on the following aspects. First, relative with health, strengthening public health, expanding the supply and assurance. Second, relative with employment, lines of credit for payroll and working capital payment, partial payment of contribution to pensions, formal support plan for employees and employed, and the protection of companies with support of banks, bank holders, Finagro and Findeter, 3 entities of the state. And third, relative with vulnerable population, cash transfer through Familias and Jóvenes en Acción, Colombia Mayor. This is a programs in Colombia. Tax refunds, solidarity income, payment of public services. As you can see, the focus of these actions implemented by the national and subnational governments in Colombia was health, employment, and vulnerable population. Now, I want to tell you about some routes of actions that local governments had to face the pandemic. With the aim of creating fast and flexible tools, the national governments promote 2 major issues. The first one, public procurement, that focus was the contracted will be treated as an emergency, which in terms of legal implies entering as direct contracting. And second one, management of public resources. It was allowed to reduce public baggage and income without the need for city council approval, and also don't allow the creation of new taxes and the reorientation of resources whose destination is mandatory. Some measures implemented in some cities of Colombia. These are some examples. Development of a platform platform to consult permission to transit. Robots venture for home deliveries in Medellin. Exclusive hours market for vulnerable people. Some cities, Barranquilla, Tunja, and Santa Marta, among others. Initiatives to the use of digital tools. Private efforts have been articulated for fundraising, Bogota and Leticia. And a real important topic is free internet to rural areas of some municipalities and territorial economic development strategies with a virtual approach, so as a Valley of Software. This is in Medellin. Now, keep in mind all above, taking all of the above as a reference, the public policy recommendation that I will propose be the following. The first one, the government must establish a sectoral dialogue focusing on 2 points. First, the government must listen and dialogue with the citizens and different sectors of society. Second, public policies must be legitimate and articulate with the different institutional level of the states. And third, the government should not allow violence to be the way to reach agreements between the parties. Sectoral dialogue is with academy, society, companies, and non-government organizations. In this sense, the second public policy recommendation is the government has to do a multi-stakeholder alliance. And this slide is in Spanish, excuse me, but I will explain in English. This is really important in order to achieve the real cooperation to dynamic of the economy in Colombia. Public sector dialogue and alliance with the public sector is with autonomous organizations, electoral organizations, control organizations. Private sector with national, international private companies, business foundations, chambers of commerce, and business associations. Civil society with national or international NGOs, social groups, classes or sectors, and natural people. So important, international cooperation, global South cooperation, bilateral cooperation, multilateral cooperation, development agencies, and philanthropy. And finally, academy with universities, institutes of technical educations, technology transfer centers, and TICTAC centers. And the others policy recommendation will be focused on first, tax reform, but this is important that the tax rate on those who earn the highest wages. Second, youth opportunities, access to free quality education. This is for young people. And first job without experience, because in Colombia, we have a big problem because young people can apply to different jobs because they need a big experience. So the recommendation is that the first job for young people will be without experience. And third, complete the vaccination cycle for the entire population. And four, finally, with the 3 topics below, tax reform, youth opportunities, and vaccination cycle for entire population. The 4 and last one is reopening of public events. gradual opening of bars and gastro bars for nightlife, holding of trade and business fairs, outdoor activities for entire population, tourist promotion. In Colombia, we have different places to visit and real places to visit with amazing climbs, and finally promotion of foreign direct investment in Colombia. This is the panorama in Colombia with the COVID-19 and also with the social protests that that we have 45 days until today with social protests and that's an attacks in the streets with policemen and citizens. It has been a very difficult in Colombia. So this is the panorama and my opinion with the social and economic issues in Colombia. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Nelson, for your insightful presentation. You have taken us to a journey to Colombia to know what is going on there, and I hope that this protest is going to be resolved soon, and all the Colombian people will get their rights and what they are asking for from social justice and equal economic treatment. I have some questions, but I'm going to leave these questions at the end. And now we'll move to another. I know I have made a small search, and I have known that Peru is your neighbor country, right? Is a neighbor country from southwest is Peru to Colombia. So I now will move to our second guest speaker, Mr. Mack Cleam, and Mr. Mack is going to share with us the Peruvian experience and his recommendation to a pathway to a recovery after COVID-19 pandemic, and also the latest political situation and elections that they are having in Peru nowadays. So I'm gonna share my presentation, Mr. Mack, from here. As you said,
yes,
you are
please.
not able. Okay, so I'm gonna share my presentation. Okay, now it is. I know that you can see it. So I call you, please, Mr. Mack, to start your presentation.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, my dear friend, for inviting me again to share with you some Peruvian and regional experience about how bad it was for us. The treatment by part of the governments, how to face the COVID-19 pandemic. And thank you for allowing me to share with you and your students and academic friends of your university about some points of view, my personal points of view, of course, and other important facts, other important data that will allow us generally to understand how is being treated here in the part of the world, how the COVID-19 affected people here, what happened with our economy, and what will be the future of our countries. For some aspects, I consider is really important we discuss. For example, here in Peru, currently we are living one of the worst uncertainty political situation. I will explain about this, but first I will start my presentation talking about the economic impact. Okay, regional view. We will start talking uh, about the health problem. we have here in this part of the world. Something that my previous colleague say something interesting, and I share his opinion, is America definitely was the worst country and the more affected by COVID-19 in all the world. Basically, we have the problem with COVID-19 because we were not prepared when COVID-19 arrived to our countries. We had different opinions how the government must have defended and how must acted to avoid the COVID-19 spread during the last year. But when COVID-19, to be honest, when COVID-19 arrived to our countries in Latin America and Caribbean, we were already living a bad political and health situation. And it will be shown in the last months in deaths because COVID-19 arrived to our continent. We were not prepared healthy, we were not prepared politically and economically to face mandatory lockdowns, and we were not prepared to respond correctly to the COVID-19. So in this part, I will show you some special numbers that will give you a general idea how bad the COVID-19 and how devastating the COVID-19 is being for us. For example, one of the first points I want to discuss with you, 26.7 million cases confirmed until now, April 21, are confirmed that 26.7 million people are confirmed with COVID-19. It represents approximately the 20% of cases worldwide. What it means that almost 20% of the cases in all the world are reported and registered here in this part of the world. A second fact that is interesting to know, 846 deaths are confirmed until now. Until April 14, 21, there are 846 deaths confirmed. What it means, approximately 28% of the deaths in all the world are registered here in this part of the continent, here in Latin America. You can imagine until now how devastating COVID-19 is coming for us if you are appreciating that almost 30% of the deaths is being registered here in this part of the world. Other fact that I want also to share with you, highest numbers of deaths. This is really terrible. Which countries or what countries are being affected in more intensive or with most intensive with the COVID-19? We have basically Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, and Peru. All these 5 countries are being affected with the highest numbers of deaths. So it means that all the 30% of deaths registered globally are coming from Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, and Peru. Interesting fact to know, Brazil was the first country in Latin America that report officially the first COVID-19 cases the last year in February. Okay, the second one was, I think, in Colombia, and the third one was in Peru, if I'm not wrong. But it can show us that basically Brazil is having the more deaths confirmed. Deaths in the region could reach approximately, this is an estimation, deaths in the region could reach 1 million by August 2021. So it means that in 2 months approximately, deaths can increase until and reach 1 million, approximately. Only imagine. But something I have to add to this presentation is Peru, if we count the deaths per 100,000 population, Peru is officially the first country with more deaths by COVID-19. The situation we are living here in my country is really, really devastating. Every month, government announce that increase, increase, and increase. Of course, I will talk about the vaccines in the final part of my presentation. Of course, we started to receive the vaccines from different countries only 1 month ago. But the problem with vaccine is we don't have the experience and we don't have the enough logistic to vaccine everyone. So please, the next PPT page, please.
Yes, I
Yeah,
have
thank you.
changed it.
Okay. Yeah, economic impact. Okay, after we talk about the numbers of the deaths, the contagions reported, because it's important to know how the COVID-19 affected our countries, it's also important to know general and regional numbers about economic contraction and how it involves our countries. For example, International Monetary Fund, International Monetary Fund estimated a 7% economic concentration of the region. In fact, this is one of the biggest contraction economically for the region. It means 7% of our economic activity will contract in not only 2021, it means also most probably in the next year, because it's really complicated for our countries to face the COVID-19 economic impact if we don't have the enough resource. Caribbean's other important fact to know, Caribbean countries that depend on tourism face deep economic declines over 50% in 2020. As everyone could know, South America is more recognized for having important natural resources. But if we talk about tourism, definitely Caribbean countries are more recognized for having more touristic places. So the economy structure of these countries, the Caribbean countries, are structured in tourism. The most important economic activity in these Caribbean countries is tourism. And how tourism was affected by COVID-19, approximately 50% in 2020. These Caribbean countries will face a declines over, even could be more, 15% in 2020. And of course, in 2021, the declines can keep. South America countries are projected to register economic contractions over 10%. As we can see, we can appreciate, South American countries are projected to register a less contraction than Caribbean's country. Why? Because according to different governments, Latin American governments' decisions, policies to face COVID-19 spread, a lot of borders, for not say almost every border of the countries, were closed for a long time, during approximately, like in Peru, 5, 6 months. So these Caribbean countries living and depending on tourism face deep economic declines, more than the South American countries, because we have natural resource and we have other economic activities that hold us and allow us to hold the situation. According to Nations Union, Latin America was already the most unequal region. This is also an important social fact to know, because it's a true, we have one of the most unequal region in the world. So it means that inequality here in this part of the world, not only in Peru, I mean also in Latin America, is really, really high. And what Nations Union says about Latin America, that Latin America was already the most unequal region in the world with no COVID-19. So if we know COVID-19, Latin America region was already the most unequal in the world, imagine how unequal is being now. What Latin America, what Nations Union say about Latin America, that for the economic, for Latin American Caribbean Commissions, confirm and affirm that 22 million people in the last year, according to the last reports, due to the COVID-19, move into poverty in this number. So you can imagine that 22 million people move into poverty, not for terrorism, not for unemployment. Of course, it's a consequence, but it was provoked by government's decisions to close economy to avoid the COVID-19 spread. So now we have in this part of the world 22 million people living in poverty officially. What is International Monetary Fund doing to help these countries to get back the economic growth and to allow more poverty? International Monetary Fund is currently lending these regions to help them to face economic recovery. So this is an important fact that we must underline to understand how the countries are receiving financial helps from International Monetary Fund. Peru COVID-19 economic impact. Now I will talk about some important economic aspects that belongs to our reality, to our Peruvian reality. Peru's government decreed long, strict, and prolonged mandatory quarantines during 5 months. Why is important to know this? Because in other countries, and I have to say this, like South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, and other countries could avoid to close their economies. And in this way, could avoid to affect directly the economy. But in Peru and other international countries, and of course Latin America and especially South America, the government when they received the COVID-19, when we received the first COVID-19 report here in our country, immediately the government decreed 15 days of mandatory lockdown. I perfectly remember when this measure was taken by government the last year. Everyone was really surprised because in the first part of the year we were hearing about the COVID-19 consequences in Europe, first in Asia, and we were expecting that the virus couldn't arrive to Peru because everyone was like, no, this virus belongs to Asian continent. It is being taken there. It won't affect for complete Peru. It will, or if it arrives, it will take a long time. But it was a speculation that that ends being a reality or a real fact immediately in the first days, even in the last days of February. But of course, the first COVID-19 case in Peru was reported by the government, by the president, in March 15. And immediately the government decreed that everyone must adopt the mandatory lockdown. And what mandatory lockdown for us? Policy, police, air forces, all these type of people were in the streets, controlling citizens' movement, citizens' activities. All the stores needed to close. Of course, the only stores that were allowed to work was medicine, pharmacies, medicines, hospitals, clinics, definitely, police stations, and other stores that also were allowed to work during the mandatory lockdown taken by the government. Where the stores selling food, selling ingredients to cook, and selling basically markets, in other words. And it was taken by government in the first part for 15 days, and it was being decreed every 15 days. The government and the president especially was reporting to the citizens how was coming the situation, and every 15 days the government extending the quarantine. Totally, I'm not exaggerating, we had approximately 5 months or mandatory lockdown. 5 months of mandatory lockdown. And as you can appreciate, the worst and the most terrible economic fall occurs in April 2020. Why? Because the measure was taken, or the mandatory lockdown was taken in March, and all the stores, all the manufacturing industry were completely closed in March. The economic implication was saying immediately in April. You can appreciate in April, our GDP fall approximately or decline approximately almost 40%. Almost 40% of our GDP declined in 2020 in April. It was terrible because we faced immediately the economic recession. Other important fact to know on how the COVID-19 affect our economy is recognize the employment fell. The employment fell or declined an average of 20% only in April to December in 2020. It was the highest rate in the last 50 years, approximately. Approximately. Why? Because when the COVID-19 arrived in the country, and government decreed and was extending every time, every 15 days, the mandatory lockdown, keeping the stores closed, ordering no stores working, no companies receiving in office people, our economy was really affected. And this immediately, as consequence, provokes the unemployment. So now we have unemployment of 20%. 20%. Of course, in the last part of the year, the government make more flexible the restrictions taken before to avoid the COVID-19 spread. It was enough. It was not enough. Why? Because the economy was already affected, and we lost a lot of companies. Many companies, especially the small companies, needed to close and break down. Why? Because we couldn't support an economic implication of this measure. Something important to say: our economy in Peru, I think also in Colombia, is confirmed approximately, or is formed approximately by 80% of, even more, 80% or 90% of informality. Okay, or 90%, our economy is being composed by informality. What informality means in our terms: companies or people that are not registered officially, that don't pay taxes. So we have an informal big economy. This is the reason why our economic impact was really, really devastating. Other thing to say about the government decisions that how the government faced during the first time of the pandemic here is that government taken different financial decisions to hold the poverty rates due to quarantine. And one of these important thing that government took the last year is cash transfer. What the government did, basically open an account to all the poor people, the most poor people, or the poorest people. The government decided to open them a special account where they will receive directly cash transfers for the government. We approximately invested $6,000 to give directly every 2 months approximately to the poorest people in our country, because they needed money to survive. Basically, it was a terrible situation that the government needed to be responsible to help the poorest people to survive the impact of the COVID-19. But despite all this collective and organized government efforts to help the poorest people, even with all these efforts, the poverty increased 6%. That, as I said before, it is approximately 2 million people in poverty. So our poverty level now is the highest rank in the last 20 years. Other important economic implications that I would like to share with you is how bad was public deficit increase here in our country by COVID-19. The public deficit increased approximately 7 points. It increased from 1.7% that occurs in 2019 to a almost 9 points in 2020. So we register an increase of the public deficit of approximately 7 to 8 points. Why? Because companies closed, people not working, people needing to survive the pandemic. Definitely, the government needed to expand and to extend the government spending to make bigger the government spending, and like all companies closes, economy closed. Basically, the government uh, couldn't couldn't take taxes, couldn't receive taxes because companies were not working. It's impossible to pay taxes when companies are not working, and it affects directly to the public debt that increased from one that takes that was occurring already in 2019 to a almost 9 points in 2020. Other important economic fact: public debt had reached 30% of the GDP by the end of the 22, above the legal limit of 30%. We have here a regulation about the public debt. Okay, this is important to know because I think in other countries there is no restrictions to the public debt, but in Peru we have a legal limitation that is 30% of the GDP must not be represented by public debt. But it occurs the contrary in the last year because the public debt increased until 35%. So it means 5% more of the legal limit we have established here. Of course, in the 1990, in the 19, or public debt was definitely less. You can see here in the in the photo in this important idea I want to share with you the financial progress of projects by sector in Peru, the lockdown period 2021 versus equivalent period 2019. In this imagine, you can see how was the decrease and how was the fall of our economy by sectors. For example, in energy, you can appreciate more than 10% occurs, almost 20% occurs in 2019, where we didn't receive, where of course was not registered even globally, the COVID-19. But after the COVID-19 arrived to the country, the energy sector, the financial progress of the energy sector declined even under 10%. And what happened with the health? The same. The health system occurs the same. The financial progress of the projects in health also decreased, not totally less than 10%, but of course, it also was affected by COVID-19 seriously. Housing and urban development has the same problem. Industry, generally talking, I think it was the most affected, as I explained before, because before the COVID-19 in 2020, or financial progress were achieving more than 15%. Okay, but after COVID-19 and due to the lockdowns taken by government, like political measures to avoid COVID-19 spread, the financial progress of the industry decreased or even fall, if you can appreciate, until less than 5%. So it's really terrible that the financial progress of projects in Peru, how it were affected by COVID-19. Water and sanitation industry, it occurs the same, but as you can see, it was not too affected by COVID-19. It is only to give you a general idea of the financial progress implications by the COVID-19. The next page, please. Something that is really important, and I will focus some additional minutes if you allow me here, because I think Peru is having an additional problem, and this is a certain problem. We have a political uncertainty due to the Peruvian elections. It started in April in the first round of the presidential election. And if in the first round or regulation established that if any of the candidates achieves more than 50%, the two more voted candidates pass to the second round to the Peruvian president election. It passed in April, and the 5 April citizens decide democratically go to vote, and the result was that in the first round passed the first candidate that you are saying, that is Pedro Castillo, who represents the leftist party, the socialist party, and the second place, Keiko Fujimori. And they needed to start again to travel into the cities, into the regions, the country, to make people hear about their proposals for the country, because we are celebrating this year the 200 independence years. We are celebrating this year 200 of independence. And the second round was taken the last week on Sunday, and the results were really, as you can appreciate, really, really uh, fantastic, historically fantastic, because this is the first moment and the first time in all our history that two candidates are too close that got divide for complete the country. Now we have a divided country. 50% voted by Pedro Castillo only to reject Keiko Fujimori election, because Keiko Fujimori is the daughter of one of the past that also is in prison presidents in Peru. Who is this president? Alberto Fujimori. And Alberto Fujimori government was in 19 almost until 20, the last year, yeah. And she is the daughter of Alberto Fujimori, who is considered a dictatorship. Okay, because in Alberto Fujimori government occurs a lot of historically Peruvian events, and a lot of people not reject. A lot of people hate Fujimori's, even like a spread name. A lot of people reject Fujimori's family, but the people that in this second round support and vote to Fujimori didn't do this to support Keiko Fujimori. They did. I mean, this 50% of the population voted to Fujimori to avoid a socialist, communist government. So you can imagine how divided is our country now. For the one part, you have the left party, the left side, represented by Pedro Castillo, and the other 50% of the country represented by Keiko Fujimori. And now, even when, of course, the general vote counting ended, there is no yet a president officially declared. Why? Because both parties, I mean, the leftist party, represented by Pedro Castillo, and the right party, represented by Keiko Fujimori, both parties presented annulments, appeals to different votes. It approximately represents 500,000 votes that can be and may be declared invalid. And most of these votes are in favor to Pedro Castillo. And what Keiko Fujimori now is doing, she's reporting that is occurring something super weird in the National Elections Authority, that she's being stolen the elections, that she won the elections, but a lot of votes are being invalid by the National Elections Authority. So we have now a legal problem, even when the general counting vote ended. We have now approximately 2 or 3 weeks of uncertainty, because we don't know exactly who is the next president. And what Pedro Castillo did, he and his party did the same. He presented annulment appeals against more than 200,000 votes in favor of Keiko Fujimori. So if you can imagine how devastating is the political uncertainty now, you will understand how bad our situation is. Because we have two candidates that one says, I won the elections because the votes counting ended, and the other candidate says that no, because there are a lot of irregularities, there are a lot of things that are super, super weird that must be investigated, and of course they both present an annulment appeals that represent approximately 500,000 votes that might be declared invalid. So now, as consequence of this political uncertainty, we are saying in the market the dollar is increasing price. The dollar price is increasing, is achieving approximately the highest rank in all our history. So imagine how terrible it is for us, because if we have an economy where the dollar price is increasing, immediately all the products we import from different countries will increase as well. So when the dollar increase, and I think it occurs the same in the India or in other country where the dollar is not a national currency, we are facing a devaluating of our local money, and we are seeing in the market um, basic products that are increasing every week, because the dollar is increasing, because investors and companies and general economies, they don't know what will happen in the next time or in the next month. Please, the last one, please. So according to our health problems by COVID-19, according to adding to our political uncertainty that we are living in these days, anyways, who results the next president, who results the next government, I will present 7 points of my personal opinion that what the next government should do to recover economic growth. Of course, one of the candidates represents the ideas to close importations, the idea to close a little bit the economy to protect national economy. The, I disagree with him, to be honest, because you need an open economy, you need an open market, free economy to allow economic growth. But this candidate, in the first part of his campaign, he started saying, no, we will close some institutions, we will close the constitutional court because they defend the transnational company. He said that he will close the people or the national authority who defend people. So he had in the first part of his campaign a bad and unfriendly economic freedom speech. And what it immediately provoked, that a lot of companies start to being worried for the future of the economy here in Peru. And with the pass of the months, he started to change and to be more friendly. And he said, no, we will respect the private investment. We welcome to all people, all different international investors to come to invest in our country. We are friendly with them. They are welcome to invest here, but of course, having the rules super clear. But it's still not, I think, in my personal opinion, it's not too sure. And yeah, it's really complicated. It's really complicated. So probably he will be the president, to be honest, probably. So what's the policy to recovery, in my opinion, the next government anyways, who results of Keiko Fujimori or Pedro Castillo, in my opinion, to recover economic growth, what they should do? Definitely, the first one is enough public spending on infrastructure and other public projects. This is what Keynesian policy says. When the economy is having some problems to recover, definitely you need the public spending. This is how the Keynesian is basically governing in all the public policies, economically talking. Because if you don't have public spending infrastructure, you won't spend enough money. What happened with the National and General Vaccine Program? This is also important, because if we want to recover the economy, we want to open for complete the markets, we want to take back the economy's activities, we really need to vaccine almost everyone. Our health system confirmed that to have immunity, a total immunity, we need to vaccine approximately the 60 or 70% of people under 18 years. Why? Because these people needed to go back to work, these people needed to travel, and with this also we reactivate the tourism sector, we reactivate the mining companies. Of course, the mining companies are already working, but they need to be immunity. So definitely one of the important things that next government should do and should carry on is to vaccine everyone. If it is possible, or if we want to get a total immunity, we need to vaccine approximately 60 or 70% of the people who are under 18 years old to recover our economy's activity with no problems to increase debts. What other thing the government should keep doing, because the government we have now already started to do this, is lending small and middle-sized business. Because one of the first programs the government taken in the last year is open a special financial account to guarantee in front of the banks that all small companies and middle companies can apply for different credits. And if they cannot pay, the government will take the credit as own. And this is important because it make the guarantee to the banks to lending companies, small companies, and to recover the economy, to recover and to avoid these companies break down and keep hiring more people, to avoid a highest fall of employment. Promote foreign investments. This is also important because if we are increasing our public spending, if we are increasing our public debt, we need to take more investments, because if we have more investments, we have more companies coming to Peru, because they are sure they can invest with all the legal and political certain that they won't be expropriated by a communist government. They need to be sure the money they are bringing to the country will be protected by our constitution, by our regulation. So if we have investment or national and even foreign investments, we will have more companies that will allow to create more employees, and will allow to recover the tax policies, to take more taxes, and with this make possible the big national public spending. Number 5, increase economic freedom for constitutional reforms. Definitely, we need to approve some constitutional reforms that increase our economic freedom. That now is more important to receive more investments, to protect more investments, to create employees. And the 2 more important things, I think, anyways, for results president must keep is the financial stability and the fiscal stability. Financial stability, what means? Don't spend a lot of money if you are not receiving a lot of money too. And finally, the fiscal stability. As I explained before, we have increased our fiscal numbers because the government couldn't reach the projected fiscal or the taxes counted. So definitely we need to recover the fiscal stability with not taking highest taxes. The bad idea is to receive more economic investments, foreign investments especially, to create more employees. I consider these 7 points are really important who results the winner of the elections to take in account. So thank you so much for paying me your attention. If there is any question, I will be glad to answer.
Thank you so much, Mack, for your insightful presentation and all this information that you have shared with us regarding Peru and the journey that Peruvian people are doing to reach a stable and a fair life. So I hope the results of the election will be to go to the favor of people at the end, not to the favor of any of the 2. So to make them reach stability very soon. So I request, please, my attendees to write in chat box or raise their hand if they would like to leave some questions to our guest speakers. So please write your questions in the chat box. Meanwhile, until they start writing their questions in the chat box, I have a question to Nelson. So what are if you are describing the Colombian economy, what is the main sectors of the Colombian economy? So you can say that Colombia is more depending on tourism, on extraction, on agriculture. We need to understand this. And what are the sectors that are most affected? Consequently, the most important sectors that have been affected by the pandemic and the protests.
Thank you. The main sectors of the economy in Colombia are focused on agricultural, construction, on manufacture, and tourism. But maybe the first sector is agricultural, because the more than 50% of the economy is about agricultural sector. Colombia is a rural country, so this is the importance of the agricultural sector. And the more affected sector, I think, is the construction sector that provides 1,000 employees. So this is the more the principal affected sector. Of course, tourism. Colombia have many places to visit, different places in the hot water, cold water, different water in the country that has affected by the pandemic. Hotel sectors, restaurant sector, it was very affected for the pandemic in Colombia.
Thank you, Nelson. My question now is for Mack. Please, I have a question regarding one of the points that you have mentioned. You have said that from 80 to 90% of the Peruvian economy is informal economy. So this is it. It makes me to start thinking why is there this high percentage of the firms in Peruvian economy, they are informal. Is it because of regulation? Registration of firms is high. Some restrictions that the government is putting. So would you please explain to us what is making the firms in Peru to prefer more the informal one, or it is because of high taxes? What is the reason behind this?
Thank you for the question. That is really interesting to know. Our economy is composed basically by 80%, 90% of informal, due to the highest cost of transactions here in Peru. What it means in economic and law terms, basically, that to be here formal is really high cost. It costs a lot to be formal in our economy, because you have to create a company or you can make business as person. But the taxes you pay, in my opinion, are not established according to the incomes of these small entrepreneurs or companies. And a lot of this informal economy is being explained because the question that entrepreneurs or commercial people formulate to themselves is, why I should become formal if being informal I can make business? Of course, they cannot apply to loans in the bank. They cannot be recognized by the government like a formal business. But the question that they always say, like, what is the advantage I will receive in my business if I become formal. So I think, of course, also for the highest taxes, the bureaucracy, the legal time you have to invest to create a company, to register in one place, and after you have to go to the tax authority. And also, if you have a problem because the tax regulation here is very, very heavy. If, for example, you are making business and you forget to declare to the tax authority something because you forgot or even you don't know, you will receive a punishment or a monetary punishment. Definitely no one wants to become formal. I think the next government will think seriously to make easier the process to become formal if you are a company, if you are an entrepreneur, or even to take seriously the proposal to reduce taxes, to be more friendly with entrepreneurs, to be more friendly with companies. Exist since approximately 5 years some policies that were approved in the government and also in the Congress to make more easier and flexible to become formal in the economy. But that question I formulate persists. Why I must, why I should be formal? What is the advantage? What is the incentive I have to become formal if I can make business being informal? That is a question that I think can be solved if government start to give a special incentive to entrepreneurs, to small companies to become formal. For example, if we allow the banks to have the lowest interest rates to small companies, if the government can say or establish some policies that allows small companies, entrepreneurs to make business, to be more friendly with them, I think the informal number will definitely decrease. This is my personal opinion. Of course, we can find others one too to discuss, but if we make a sum up or a summarize of this, we can establish the first one: higher taxes, taxes bureaucracy process or procedures, legal bureaucracy procedures to become formal. Yeah, this is really, really interesting to know why it's important to think why informal economy is still persisting in our society.
Yeah, thank you, Mac. Yes, Nelson, you want to add something?
Hi, Nelson.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Heba. Yes, I want to share with you some economic projections of some banks in Colombia for 2021 to 2025. The banks in Colombia estimate in terms of trade will increase 16% to 21. Also, they expect the exchange rate to average 3,550 pesos per dollar this year. They project economic growth between 3.8% and 5.9%, with central scenario of 4.7% for 2021. Also, some banks in Colombia say that GDP will be at a level equivalent to 98% of what was observed before the pandemic. For 2025, they forecast an average growth of 3.4%. They project also growth in 5.3% by 2021. And they said also that really important is the contribution of the exports to GDP will increase almost 6% due to the reactivation of external demand, and imports will increase 10.2% into 2021. Finally, they said that regard to the labor market, urban unemployment will have an a slow correction from 18.4% to 13.6% for following years. Big decrease of unemployment. And they project the deficit of the national government of 8%. And the next 5 years implies a gradual reduction of the primary deficit until reaches reach a surplus in 2025. This is some economic projections of some banks in Colombia that talking about what happens in Colombia in the next year between 2021 to 2025, taking in mind what happens with the pandemic 19 in Colombia.
Yeah, thank you, Nelson, for sharing these predictions. So it is some of them they are good. So I hope they will be true. Pirena is asking in the chat box a question to Mack. What is the best economic sector? So what is the prominent economic sector in Peru? We are asking you to analyze the structure of the Peruvian economy. What is the prominent economic sector in Peru? Which one
Thank
is
you
the
for the
main
question.
sector?
Thank you for the question. Definitely the mining sector in the first place, and the second one, infrastructure, construction. Both of them are really important for economy because 12% of our economy structure is composed and is focused on mining. Okay, 12% of our economy is formed by mining investments, mining sector, in different levels for sure. But to be honest, and this is important, sorry, I have to underline this because it's important to say in a political uncertain situation and time. One of the candidates, I have to say his name, Pedro Castillo, who represents the leftist party, he officially and publicly say that one of his main proposals is to renegotiate it, or basically to to eliminate the contract that already these mining investments or investors and companies already has with the government. Why? Because he assumes that the mining companies, the transnational mining companies, only lives in Peru 30% of the incomes. According to what he said, is he thinks the companies mining only lives in Peru by taxes 30% of the incomes, and 70%, according to what he says, is 70% is taken for complete by the companies and taken out of the origin countries this investment is coming. This is completely false. This is completely false. And what mining sector, how mining sector react in front of these declarations, in front of this political speech? Only the last week, but also the Monday after the first election results were known, the mining sector in the stock markets went down more than almost 20% of the stock's value. Why? Because this candidate is publicly saying that the companies in mining who came to the Peru to invest in the mining sector is only living 30%, that they are bad because the natural resource belongs to the nation, the natural resource to the, and he all the time says people. And this is the typical leftist speech that we are used to hear. We hear the same in Venezuela, we hear the same in Brazil, in Bolivia, even in Cuba. that they think they represent everyone and that they represent to all citizens, and they have the morality of the ethical right to say in behalf of everyone, like, the people says you are a bad company because you are living only 30%, so you are all that a lot of money, the million dollars, only you live to Peru the 30% and the 70 is for you for complete, and you are not leaving more money. This is completely false, because if we make some countable calculations, the mining companies who come here to invest need to to invest a lot of money. Really, it's really important, this important sector. So how the sector, the mining sector reacts to affront this, a lot of mining companies are really worried, because if the candidate is saying publicly that if he becomes president, he will renegotiate the contracts, saying like, even, and you have to know this because it's very important. He said if the companies the companies won't accept to pay 70% of taxes, he will expropriate. He will nationalize the companies, because he has a right like Peruvian president, and he represents the people, and definitely the people who has a lot of or even enough economic knowledge will reject for complete complete this bad and unfriendly investment speech. So this is happening right now. This is happening right now. We are having uncertainty policy, and even I will show you, if you allow me, I will send you to the WhatsApp photos of how people here with Peruvian flags is going to the streets to say, we want democracy, we want freedom, because you represent the Marxist, the Leninist party that basically was applying other countries and also occurs the same. So these people is going out to the streets to protest in front of the leadership in front of the boss of the National Elections Authority to ask the truth of the elections, because the Keiko Fujimori party lawyers found a lot of weird things in the elections, and they are reporting to make invalid these votes. So the other part that represents the left party, they are trying to defend. They are trying to say that Keiko Fujimori doesn't accept that she lost the elections, because she tried to be president in the 10 previous years as well, because she is the daughter of one of the most questionable presidents we had in our history, Alberto Fujimori. To be honest, I have to say he was the best president, because he changed the bad, terrific, and economic fall we were living in the 80 years, because he changed the constitution democratically, and he established a new constitution. That constitution we have now, the constitution of 1993, that allow us to receive in the same level the foreign investments, national investments too, and this constitution gives them a special national legal protection. So this is how we got to reduce the poverty that was in the 90, even before. The extremely poverty represents 50% now, thanks to this constitution. We reduce the poverty to 20%. Of course, it increased 10 points according to what I explained in the exposition to the COVID-19. But if COVID-19 never existed, definitely our economic growth will continue making less poverty. Also, I don't understand why these people still think that closed markets, public companies can still have a prosperous country. Definitely 50% of people say in the democratic elections no to this candidate. He's, until the ending counting, he represents a little bit, approximately there is a 60,000 votes of difference between them. And what is doing the candidate? He's saying like, this candidate Fujimori is not accepting, that definitely the people doesn't want. But this is, I show you that the polls is definitely is 50%, almost 50% for each one. So the country now is really divided. 50% of the country hate Fujimori for his father actions. for his father political actions, and 50% who vote for Fujimori. I vote for Fujimori. Definitely, we didn't vote for Fujimori because we want Keiko Fujimori president. We voted for Fujimori because we didn't have more options. Because in the second round, when the first round of the elections end, when in the TV news appears that the two next candidates that will run the two rounds of the elections was Pedro Castillo and Keiko Fujimori, everyone was in shock. Everyone was in shock, and we were like, "What?" Because we were really in shock. We didn't expect to have this political uncertainty panorama. And this, why it occurs? Because in the first round of the elections, more than approximately 3 million of valid people to go to vote, they didn't vote. Because even they didn't go to vote. They say like, I don't want to contagious COVID. I don't, or even they say that it doesn't matter what happened with Peru. I don't need to vote. I didn't, and they didn't go to vote. And now we are paying the consequences of these 3 million people that doesn't accept the political responsibility every citizen has to go to vote democratically. So now we are facing this political uncertainty because I explained both parties presented annulments or appeals to eliminate or make invalid more than 600,000 votes. This is something we are still saying now, and something that I have to add politically talking. Yesterday, one of the most popular periodists or national speakers we have here in TV, he presented something really terrible, that the president we have now, Sagasti, the current president, called by phone to the Nobel Prize of Literature we have, Mario Vargas Llosa, to ask him that he interferes to convince Fujimori that she lost the elections. Why? Because Mario Vargas Llosa, who is our Nobel Prize of Literature, he support all the campaign to, because he's a liberal, he support Keiko Fujimori. So the president yesterday called by phone to this person to ask him he must interfere to convince Fujimori she lost the election. And definitely what it means, this means even a constitutional fall, because a constitutional affair, because the president cannot interfere the elections. This is completely forbidden by our constitution. And being here 9 of the morning, I will say something that is true. We will have more instability, because definitely yesterday in the night when this news was known and was exposed, the national the Congress we have start to think to take out of the government constitutionally the president, because the president cannot interfere the elections to make favors in favor of one or other candidate. He must be neutral, and he's not being neutral because he called to the Nobel Prize of Literature to try to convince him, like, hey, I have the numbers. We have already a president that is Castillo. The other one must accept, but not, because candidate Fujimori also has the right to present legally in the courts to make invalid votes that were things, because it's something incredible. So imagine that terrible situation we are living now, that today the Congress can present a constitutional report or annulment appeal against the president. So we will lose the current president. We will lose the stability economically, and we are still waiting for the national authority, National Election Authority, to pronounce about these 500 votes. So how is the panorama here in Peru? In one word, please help. Please help. Please, God, take me away. Please, God, take me away. Like everyone's saying, yeah, this is really terrible. This is terrible. I will keep informing you, and you will be really surprised of all the things occurring here.
Yes, right. So my prayers is with you and Peruvian people. I hope you reach stability very soon. There is one question from Dr. Firdaus Malik. You are raising your hand. You want to ask a question to our guest speakers?
Yes, thank you for giving me an opportunity. Actually, I have, brief observation with Professor, Nelson. He has, shared some interesting projections. So I want to know, what is the rationality of these projections, and as per the current economic performance, are these projections in line to the present economic, scenario of your country? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the question. The original economic projections, taking into account banks and Central Bank of Colombia, is that the economic growth will be more or less at 3% this year, and we expect for the next year, 2022, 2023, 2024, and 2025 are almost 4 and 5% economic growth in Colombia. It's important mention that Colombia, in Colombia, it has been a real horrible situation between police and citizens, and the citizens and government. So it has been difficult, the situation. So economic, health, and social situation in Colombia is complicated by the COVID-19. This is the first topic, but also health, health situation in Colombia, unemployment, young, we don't have opportunity for young people. We don't have opportunity to access to higher educations for young people. So
for the youth.
Yeah, some topics that it's really difficult, not just for the COVID, not just for the COVID. It's in other topic, like health, job opportunities, education, tax reform, health reform. So, in conclusion, that central bank in Colombia expect that for this year and next year, the economic growth are almost the 3 to 5% of the economy. This is the original projections, but it depends on what happens in Colombia with the protests and the dialogue with the government and citizens.
Yeah. So these predictions, they are positive because they are thinking that the policies that have been already undertaken, they are going to have their fruits in the future. So that's why they are having positive, although the situation in the currently is not good. So I can see that Professor Evodio has joined us. Hello, Professor. We are nearly finishing, but before welcoming you to the session, I have one last question to ask regarding the economic integration and political integration in between Latin American countries. As you know, our center is focusing on global South and South-South cooperation. So, is there any regional cooperation that Colombia or Peru are getting assistance from other Latin American countries, economic assistance? Do you have some neighbor friends countries that are helping you in this tough time? Would you please share with us some of this information regarding the economic regional integration in Latin America? your friends from Latin America? Is there any regional cooperation you are having, maybe between Colombia and Peru? We don't know.
Can I answer first, or Nelson, you want to go first?
Okay, Mack, you can go first.
You can answer.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure. I think all Latin American countries, especially South American countries, are in real problems, that they are not in conditions to help others one. Probably not. I think Colombia also has protesters, also has political problems, and I'm not sure, but I think Colombia will also face the same problem that Chile had. So Peru will have the same. We will have a lot of protesting here, because a lot of protesting will occur here, because the leftist part, because they assume they won the elections, they already say, if the people doesn't respect the decision of the people, they will go to the streets to protest, and we already know what it happens. Because here in Latin America, if something is really common between us, is here the leftist party, they know how to protest, how to make conflicts, how to make a country really, really, really devastating. So I think we don't have mutual or diversional cooperation between Latin American countries. I'm not sure, probably not, because Latin America, generally talking, is having and facing the same problems. COVID-19 affects really terrible our economies, and imagine having economic problems, health problems, people dying. 30% of the deaths registered in the world belongs to Latin America. Add to this situation the economic problem we're facing, and add more the political problems in Colombia and in Peru we are facing. Definitely, I don't know if there is other country that can be in worse condition. I think it's really, really horrible for Latin America that we are not in condition to help. We are needing help from other countries. Latin America now needs help to other countries like Europe, maybe United States, because the situation here we are facing and we are trying to survive is really, really terrible. Really, really terrible. But I think, if I'm not wrong, there's no political, mutual, financial cooperation in our country.
Yeah, I see. You want to add something, Nelson, in this point, regarding this point?
No, I think it's the same.
Okay.
Not just Colombia. I think all countries of Latin America is the same situation. We don't have in the how do you say, the capacity to help other countries, because we have similar problems: political economy, fiscal economy, health problems, protests, social protests all days in Colombia. In this moment, right now, all days happening protests, all days clash between police and citizens, homicides, deaths, all days. So it's very difficult. I think the Colombia and the countries of Latin America, we have the same problems. So it's difficult help other countries in the region.
Yes. Okay, so it is because of the political problems that you are facing and the social problems, you are not in a good position to help your neighbors and to work together on.
Yes, of course.
Solidarity. Yeah. So I hope this situation is going to be resolved very soon, and Colombia and Peru will reach a state of stability. I would like to thank Professor Nelson and Mr. Mack for their insightful presentation and for taking us to this journey to Colombia and Peru, and to know about your economies and all the problems that you are sharing, and also all these policy recommendations that you have shared with us. Thank you so much. it was really interesting sessions that we have. And I would like you to join me to welcome Professor Evodio Kaltenecker. I hope that I'm pronouncing the name right. You can correct me if I'm pronouncing it wrong, so I'm sorry. But Professor Evodio Kaltenecker, I would like to present him at first. He is assistant professor of international business at EGADE Business School del Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico. Professor Evodio holds a BA in engineering from the Military Institute of Engineering in Brazil. He has a master's degree in industrial engineering from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and an MBA from the Harvard Business School in the United States, and his PhD is from the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. He has occupied several senior positions at multinational companies, and currently holds the position of international faculty both at the Tecnológico de Monterrey and EGADE Business School in Mexico. In addition, Professor Evodio has taught in MBA and executive MBA programs in several universities across the world, in Austria, in South Africa, in Ireland and Angola. Professor Evodio is also a research fellow at the Emerging Markets Institute at the Cornell University in the United States, and is a member of Mexico's National Research System. So that's why, ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have with us in this second session of our today international event, Professor Evodio, to share with us his expert opinion on the impact of COVID-19 on the Mexican and Brazilian economies, and his vision about the future policy recommendation. I request, please, Professor Evodio to share his presentation and to take us to another journey to two Latin American countries, Mexico and Brazil. Professor Evodio.
Thank you, Professor Adam. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you. And I'm going to share, I'm not like an expert in Microsoft Teams, so let me see how can I do this. PowerPoint, let me see.
I can share it for you if you, okay.
Let me see if it is. Can you see my screen? I think you can. Let me see, I'm sharing my screen.
Yes, I think it will start now.
Sharing my screen. It's taking some time, you know. I'm in Brazil right now, it's the other side of the world. Okay, let me see. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it is starting. Yes. I think it is starting. Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
and
yes, perfect.
Okay, so, and can you see this bar below or just my slides?
I can see the first slide, the introduction slide.
Okay, so here we go. And thank you again, Professor Adam, and for those in this virtual room. I'm very informal, okay? So in case you have any question, any comment, just say something, okay? Just jump into my talk, okay? So the idea is, let me present. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Mexico and Brazil. It's clearly not a deep dive in the country policies, just like an idea for those not really involved with both countries. And then I'm going to the most important part, the challenges both countries face dealing with in a post-COVID world. Okay. So our agenda for this brief conversation, it's a little bit of business and political overview for both countries and the challenges for in a post-COVID world. Okay, so just to have an idea, you guys, I have no idea if it's the lag between my screen and your screen. So I think you can see this circle with the global economies, right? You see the size of Brazilian economy here?
Yes, Professor, yes.
Okay, the size of a Brazilian economy and Mexico economy. Mexican economy is a little bit smaller than Brazilian economy. And a little bit about Brazil, just a little bit like general information. It's the 5th largest country in the world regarding territory, also population, member of WTO and candidate member of OECD. Last year, due to COVID and the political implications of our president, GDP contracted 5%, which is not that bad considering the scenario. And we expect a growth of 4 to 5% 2021. Brazil is a commodity powerhouse, so we sell mostly to China. And until a few years ago, Brazil sold more of its stuff to the United States. And then based on the spectacular growth in China, China became the most important trade partner for Brazil, right? And also some other countries in Latin America, which is different. We tend to think that, okay, Mexico, Latin America, Mexico speaks Spanish and Brazil Portuguese. And okay, it's all about commodity. No, clearly not. Mexico has a different story. We are going to see. So Brazil, exporter of commodities to China. Okay, to put in a simple way. So take a look at food production in Brazil, sugar, several commodities. Brazil is either number 1 or number 2 in production, in exports, and very diverse destinations. And a little bit about Mexico. Take a look. The territory is a little bit smaller compared to the US territory. GDP growth actually contracted a lot more, 20%. So Mexico suffered more in an economic perspective compared to Brazil. And a little bit about the political situation, okay? So when I joined the job market like a long time ago, it was very, very uncommon to have Latin America or any Latin American country in the cover of The Economist magazine. And to take a look, 2020, 2002, again 2002, when Lula, the leftist, the union leader, was elected, and then again 4 years later, and then we had this interesting cover in November 2009. Okay, and was the discussion with the Economist group. I was kind of involved. I never worked before at the Economist, but I had contact with those guys. And there was a discussion whether or not was the right time to say, put like this very positive view of this liberal, they call themselves newspaper. Okay, whether or not was the right time to say, okay, Brazil, the country of the future, but the future never arrives. Now the future has arrived. Okay, and they published it, and 4 years later, the great deceleration of the BRICS countries, and then September 2013, people started to second guess about what was happening in Brazil. Then 2014, Brazil needs change, the Brazilian quagmire, the fall of Brazil. This is the former president in that time. Time to go, she was impeached, and then people gave up. Said, yeah, Brazil betrayed us. And then in March 2017, things improved again. And the country elected Bolsonaro in 2018. It's a low-level politician, fairly unknown, okay? But he was elected mostly because people were kind of fed up of the corruption scandals that happened during the leftist governments. Okay, so he was the guy that would kill corruption and open the markets and organize the reforms that Brazil desperately needs. Okay, what happened? And he was elected because this anti-PT, PT is Portuguese for Workers' Party, and he had this narrative. So I'm against Workers' Party, and he was elected, claiming to be a liberal in the economic perspective, but never happened. Okay, and he kind of betrayed his own promises. And then last week, we get to discover the dismal decade. It's an interesting report. You may not agree. No one agrees with everything. This newspaper is like really a liberal approach, but has a point. The argument is that the problems that Brazil is facing, part of the blame comes from Bolsonaro, but part of the blame comes also from the previous governments. Okay, that never made the homework. Okay, to organize the economy, to open up the economy, okay, and to decrease the size of the Brazilian state. Let's move to Mexico. Mexico is the opposite situation. Now Mexico has a leftist government, okay, and also not doing fine because Andrés Manuel López Obrador, AMLO, really supports strong interference of the government in the economy, right? So they kind of they are both, in my perspective, both bad presidents, but in the opposite directions. We had recently elections in Mexico, and this sorry for the Spanish. So in the inner circle, the inner semicircle was the situation until last week. So this one in dark red, okay, was the president's party and his power over the Congress. He owned more than 50% of the lower house. Now he owns less than 50%. So his life as a politician will be a little bit more difficult because he will need to talk to other parties to pass his regulations. So the situation is that he's going to face maybe a harder Congress to implement his strategy. So now to the important part, okay? The challenges for both countries in a post-COVID world. So before we move on, let me ask, is there any question, any comment so far based on what you know, based on what you know, any comment, any question?
Actually, so there is only one question, the Professor Evodio, regarding the economic structure in Brazil and Mexico. So would you please just give us information about what is the main sector in Brazil and Mexico? So is it a more manufacture sector or agriculture? We need just to have information regarding this.
I see. Thank you for the question. Yes, there are differences. We are going to see in a couple of slides. So while Brazil is mostly agricultural, there are industries in Brazil, and there are fine industries in Brazil, okay? But on average, Brazil's strength is in the agricultural side. If you look at Mexico and Brazilian economy kind of complement Chinese economy because China buys commodities. Mexico is different. Mexico, because of the proximity with the United States, it's a manufacturing powerhouse. People tend to forget that. And most of the manufacturing in Mexico is based in Mexico to take advantage of labor costs, low labor costs, and logistics, to serve the US market. So in some sense, Mexico is a competitor of China. Not as important from a manufacturing perspective, but is a competitor to China regarding the US market. Remember that the border between Mexico and the United States is the longest border in the world between a rich country and a poor country. So we need to take this in mind. In this mutual influence from both sides. Okay, so to your question, Professor Adam, is yes, there are differences. Brazil has both agricultural and manufacturing, okay, and Mexico is mostly manufacturing. Mexico is an open, way more open than Brazilian economy to globalization. Brazil is kind of concentrated. Several reasons. Geography, okay, we speak Portuguese in Brazil. So 80% of the Portuguese speakers in the world are in Brazil. And we have this Atlantic Ocean. We are far from the main centers of the world. Our neighbors speak Spanish. We have the huge chain of mountains that separate us from our neighbors and the Amazon rainforest. Okay, so although we tend to think, okay, Latin America is same thing, clearly not. So actually, as of today, those two countries, they are kind of different regarding the nature of their economies. Okay, Mexico is smaller and more open and strongly connected to the United States. And Brazil, on the trade part, highly connected to Mexico, to China because of the commodities and some manufacturing. But Brazil, we are also going to see Brazilian industries, they produce most of everything they produce for the Brazilian market. So we have, compared to Mexican multinationals, we have fewer and smaller Brazilian multinationals compared to Mexican multinationals. Okay, so Mexico is the smaller guy that trades with the rest of the world. And Brazil is the bigger guy that trades with mostly with the internal market.
Yes,
Back to my slide. I'm opening my slides again, okay?
Yes.
And now we are going to discuss the impact of COVID and the challenges and possible remedies for this situation. Just 1 second, it's kind of slow here. Okay.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so first let's think about COVID. Okay, clearly it's a mess around the world, and I like to think that we try scholars, guys like us, we tend to use the experiences from the past. However, what happened in 100 years ago with the influenza pandemic cannot be automatically applied to COVID pandemic. It was a different world, okay? So there is some data that says that we lost 50 million lives in 1920. But in a world with 1 billion people, we still running numbers, but so far, almost 4 million people died in a world with almost 8 billion people. So the impact of the influenza was much bigger in that world that's happening today. And think, not because the impact is low, no, because the impact of the influenza was huge. It's very hard for us to understand, okay? And in a less complex world, less global, analogical world, okay? And highly dependent on manufacturing and agriculture. There's a typo here, sorry, right? So my first advice when we discuss COVID is that, okay, let's try to remember what happened in the past, but pay attention because the impact was different. And what the challenges that you are going to see in this post-COVID world? I put in, there are many other categories, okay? But for the sake of brevity, I'm using only 3 areas. I'm thinking about 3 areas of impact of COVID in our world. So the challenges in a post-COVID world. First, I would say asymmetry. Okay, we are going to face, we are already facing a more asymmetric world. The second one, the impact in geopolitics. For instance, the US president saying that it's going to deliver 500 million vaccines to poor countries. So China and the US, and I think the US engaged later, is this geopolitics of vaccines. Okay, to use the vaccines as soft power. And we had, like, in the 80s, a bipolar world, US versus the Iron Curtain. And now we are seeing US versus China, okay? And what we see also a mistrust in institutions worldwide, okay? It's not only Mexico or Brazil, but mistrust in institutions, in democracy and national governments, which is kind of bad. So I want to move to discuss a little bit of the challenges that we are going to face in this category of asymmetry. So types of industries, so asymmetry in the types of industries, mobile technologies, logistics, electronic payment. Okay, those industries, they were, their growth, COVID speeded up their growth. So some industries, because of the COVID, are doing fine. Also, size of companies. Those companies in the mobile technologies, electronic payment, and logistics, they're getting bigger compared to other companies that are suffering more. Think of, we are in the business of education. Okay, how much education is suffering? Scholars and students, it's too much. Technology is great for international conference. We do not need to travel anymore. But for kids, education of kids, it's very bad. Okay, think of people. The idea of concentration of wealth is getting stronger. I'm not against billionaires, but billionaires are getting even richer. Okay, and also, which is the negative part, the middle class is shrinking. So you had either a few happy ones and a large number of people, the middle class, are impoverishing. Also, from a national perspective, richer nations are leaving the pandemic sooner and better than other economies. So I think one of the topics in the post-COVID world I call asymmetry. It's a very asymmetric world. Remedies for this asymmetry, okay? And we all have our own economic bias, right? Sometimes some people more pro-government, some people more pro-market. I'm in the middle, but more pro-market. It's totally fine. It's okay to have different opinions in the rooms, okay? But what we see is that more than ever, countries like Mexico and Brazil, they need to define what they want for them. Okay, and an exporter of commodities, or in case of Brazil, or a country with low innovation, very low innovation levels, just like Mexico. Okay, which state we need? The state is good enough. Okay, it's providing good services, education. So I guess that in a post-COVID world, the discussion about the reforms of the state, whether to strengthen or not, and which areas of the federal government should be strengthened, is going to be even more important. And again, regardless of the opinion, but this discussion should happen. Why? Because companies and countries and people are suffering more, and also suffering in an asymmetric way. Okay. Also, because of the low level of internal investment, those two countries, they need to offer, to increase their attractivity to FDI, foreign direct investment, to become more competitive. I live in Guadalajara, okay? It's a city that benefits a lot. Around Guadalajara, there is a ring of multinationals. And what happens is what we call a spillover effect. Okay, the multinationals go to that city, and the city needs to provide schools, hospitals, hotels, roads, airports, manufacturing jobs. They pay better than agricultural jobs. Okay, take a look at this picture on the right-hand side. Most of inflows, FDI inflow in Mexico comes from the United States, which is expected, right? It's clearly expected, but almost 50%. What about the other countries? Okay, and because the states in both countries, they kind of have prejudice against dealing with private sector. So public-private partnerships can be a good alternative to help governments and companies to offer good services, education, medicine, health systems to the public. Okay, so my suggestion and has to do with to decrease the prejudice against PPPs, public-private partnerships. The federal states already showed us that in a complex world, they cannot do anything on themselves. Also companies, think of development of those vaccines, partnerships between private companies and governments. And Brazil provides a good example. A local vaccine is being developed with the Brazilian government and local international players, not only on the testing part, on the distribution of vaccines, but on the development of the molecules. Okay. Other remedies for this asymmetry is that those two countries, although they are large economies, they're not the best places to run businesses. They need to make the life of executives and entrepreneurs easier. And for that, we do not need to change the constitution, or changes in the micro level. So details on regulation to open up the economy for entrepreneurs. Both countries are rich of people, creative people, hardworking people, that they want to take care of their lives and run their business. But it's so complicated to open a company, to open a bank account, to get credit. And this does not depend of the Congress. This can be done at a certain extent in the micro level. For instance, doing business in Mexico, this report, it's a fresh new report issued every year. Okay, Mexico is number 60 out of 190 countries. Think of innovation in Mexico. Mexico is number 55 out of 121 countries in the global rankings. There is room for improvement. Okay, is Mexico and Brazil going to be the next Singapore? No, clearly not. Very large countries. Singapore is a city state. It's very small. Okay, but can be improved. There are things that can be done to allow innovation and to now allow entrepreneurship. Think of Brazil. Doing business in Brazil is even worse. Okay, so Brazil, when I do these talks to international investors, Brazil is too big to be ignored from an economic perspective. Okay, but it's too complicated to have a larger allocation of assets from those multinationals. Okay, so Brazil is big, and Brazilians buy Brazilian stuff produced in Brazil because the economy is closed. So multinationals are here, and they are doing fine. Coca-Cola has been in Brazil for 8 years. I worked for Coca-Cola. General Electric, more than 60. I worked for General Electric. They are very happy. Banks in Brazil, they're very happy. It's easy to expatriate the dividends, but it's complicated. I like to tell investors and CEOs abroad that if you want to be part of the Brazilian game, welcome, But be sure you will need to hire more tax accountants and attorneys. Why? Because to be compliant with Brazilian bureaucracy and Mexico is the same thing. It's complicated. It's not easy way to do business. You can do business. You can be profitable, but it's not easy. Okay. Take a look at the Global Innovation Index for Brazil. Geopolitics, another area of impact of in a post-COVID world is we already live in a bipolar world between the US and China. Someone may say, what about Europe? Yes, but Europe's not a country. Okay, so if it's difficult to run a country, imagine how difficult it is to run an European Union with 30 different countries. Sometimes they fight each other and they cannot agree in the single topic. Okay, so clearly Europe has a very important role. Okay, but I guess we see maybe not the world 2.0 will be world 2.5. So two global poles of influence, and Europe, depending on the sector, with a relevant role. Okay, and then it comes to Mexico and Brazil. Okay, because Mexican economy, let me show the next slide. Take a look at here. So this is the longest border between a rich country and a poor country. And when, for instance, when the United States closed its border due to COVID, the border between Mexico and the United States was never closed, right? Because the billions of flow of dollars, the flow of information, companies, products, people across this border. And also, take a look at this, how linked take a look at this. This is the connection between the Mexican economy and the US economy. So every time the US goes up, Mexican economy goes up as well. Every time the US economy goes down, Mexico economy suffers a lot. So Mexico is connected forever with the United States. Sometimes they don't like this, okay? But Mexican economy is already connected forever. I teach in Austria. Every time German economy goes up, Austrians are happy because their economies goes up as well. So there is this theory of global trade, the gravitational theory of global trade, that you tend to trade with your neighbors. So make sure you have rich neighbors, and then because you are becoming rich as well. So going back to a few slides. So we have a bipolar world, and this presents an opportunity for Brazil because Mexico is already connected to the United States. And we see some investment, Chinese investment in Mexico, but it doesn't happen that much. And we see huge investments, FDI, China, companies and country in Brazil, in infrastructure. Okay, why? Because China wants this has this resource-seeking strategy to guarantee access to raw materials, minerals, meat, soy from Brazil, and all the other countries as well. And there is also a geopolitical tone here. China is little by little leveraging its economic power, even in trade and FDI, to push the envelope in some countries to change the country's perspective on Taiwan. Okay, what happened with Hong Kong was just a trial, just a warm-up. The jewel in the crown is Taiwan. Okay, for instance, very small countries in Central America already reversed their opinion about Taiwan, and they do not consider Taiwan an independent country anymore. Okay, so we see this geopolitical move from China. And Mexico, for good or bad, is strongly connected to the United States. There's an opportunity for a poker or a strategy play from Brazil. benefit from the trade from China, but also benefiting from the transplant of technology and the involvement of US multinationals in Brazil. Okay, one year ago, we have a couple of friends and we wrote this idea of the geopolitical factor of Belt and Road Initiative in Latin America. And in this paper, we discussed that the very presence of the United States decreases Chinese influence in Mexico. And because Brazil is kind of far, even geographically speaking, from the United States, Brazil has more room to maneuver this interface with China. Okay, in the short term, I do not see an alignment, a geopolitical alignment in Brazil and China. Brazil is a democracy. China is not. Brazil, the president is far right, and China is far left in the political spectrum. Okay, so at least in the near future, we do not see an automatic alignment. But it's a room for Brazil to play the best hand from both sides. And this worries me a lot. Okay, the mistrust, so the general public mistrust in institutions and democracy and national governments. Both countries should strengthen their civil societies. Okay, the idea that the government is going to do everything for us, and COVID proved again that this assumption is false, right? And also improve the democracy, not only the civil societies, but also the democracies. Think of what happened in Brazil, or what is happening in Brazil nowadays. We have these president in the denial mode regarding COVID. Okay, the beauty of democracy that some state governments, state level governors, they opposed this idea and pushed the envelope for vaccination in Brazil. So the beauty of democracy is that you do not put all the power of the country in one person's hand. Okay, so in São Paulo state, the richest state in the country, vaccination started earlier in São Paulo than other states, not because the government loved the people, but they want to make sure he was an opposition to the current president. The fragmentation of Brazil, this is very specific in Brazil and also in the lesser extent in Mexico, very fragmented. We have like too many political parties. There's no room for everyone. So in Brazil, communist parties with the word communist in the title, in their name, we have two. It never worked elsewhere, but in Brazil we have two communists, still have two communist parties. Just to have an idea, we have more than 30 parties. It's not possible. Okay? And back to Mexico and Brazil, the impact of COVID in manufacturing. When COVID started, we remember, because most of the big chunk of manufacturing, or what we call global value chains, are based in China. And the pandemic started in China, we saw the disruption of global value chains. We see that products, they were not being manufactured because of the pandemic in China. Simultaneously, the beginning of the pandemic and the big chunk of global value chains, they were in the same country. What managers did, they said, you know what, in the past, we focused only in efficiency. Our global value chains is let's put stuff in China because they have a very great, they are far, but they have like great infrastructure. So the focus of pre-COVID supply chains was efficiency, speed, quality, and low cost. What happened with this major disruption? Multinationals, they moved from efficiency to resilience. They said, you know what? We need to create or change our supply chains to resist more to outside, to impacts, negative insights, to resist to negative impacts from outside. So we see a change in the strategy from efficiency to resilience. And this change opens up an opportunity for Mexico. Okay, because the discussion is where I'm going to put my manufacturing. And also technology happening. So allow it, technology and this change of strategy helps Mexico. So companies are partially moving production from China to Mexico to access the US market. Maybe the price will be a little bit higher because of the labor costs. Maybe the price will be the same because of the proximity of Mexican market and the US market. And also Mexico being part of the USMCA deal. Okay, the trade deal in North American countries. So Mexico can benefit if they do it right, attract manufacturing. So what we see, what we call regionalization of supply chains. So instead of global supply chains, we expect regional supply chains. And Mexico can be the site of one of those. It's not going to help Brazil. Take a look. Export over GDP from Brazil, for Brazil. Brazil does not export much and does not import much. It's an example of a closed economy. Take a look. This picture I did not build this. I took from the Harvard Atlas of Economic University, Atlas of Economic Diversity. So this picture for Brazil shows, and let me explain this picture first. So all products in the world are reflected, are explained in those bubbles, okay? So of the families of every single product that we manufacture in the world is here. The size of the bubble is the value of those items, and the links between the bubbles shows that those products, they are connected somehow. For instance, one of those bubbles is engines for cars. Another bubble connected to this first bubble is the industry for tires for cars. And we see here some clusters, right? On the right-hand side, we see some clusters. Similar products, they are part of each other's production chain. Another cluster here, and so Brazil, the yellow bubbles are the things that Brazil produces in agriculture. The blue ones in chemicals, and the purple ones in electronics. So Brazil produces a lot of stuff, okay? But like it's really, really, really not deep into the global value chains. Brazil offers, and this picture is for Brazil, okay? It's a kind of secondary role regarding global manufacturing and global integration. And this big one here is oil. Brazil is a net producer of crude oil, is an importer of refined oil, but an exporter of crude oil. And we already saw. So in the post-COVID world, we see a redesign and what we also call reshoring of manufacturing. And Mexico is one of the countries that is going to benefit if they do it right. What we tend to think we suggest in a post-COVID world, okay, for Brazilian and Mexican companies, we suggest the 3 R's. Respond. First R is respond. How to respond to this global crisis, which in those countries is far from over, okay? Brazil and Mexico is going to deal with COVID for more time than developed economies, okay? Focus on liquidity. Try to sell assets if necessary to respond because they need to be in the survival mode. The retake, okay, so we survive it. And little by little, the economy is going to be open. is going to be opened, right? So this idea, I do not like the cliche new normal, but okay, here it comes, new normal. Okay, so there will be a new operational discipline. People after the COVID, we are going to have this revenge spending. We stayed stuck in our houses and apartments for almost 2 years, so we need to travel. We need to celebrate. We need to see the people we didn't see. And then try to reinvent themselves. Why? Because customers all over the world, not only Mexico and Brazil, we develop new habits. Okay, in our houses, we will need new furniture because we are going to spend more hours in our houses. We will need offices. Okay, companies, they may go to adjacent markets. Think of IKEA, they sell furniture for living rooms. Now they have to sell furniture for living rooms that sometimes are offices, there are sometimes are ordinary rooms and smaller houses and kitchens. So look for successful companies. They will need to understand the change of habits that we all are going to face. Maybe I need a better equipment, better computers. Maybe now I need a better background for my classes. I need the lamps. I need 2 cameras and 4 computers, not only one. Changing the behavior. We expect brand loyalty is going to decrease. Why? Because some of the products that we were used to are not available anymore. And we started to test other stuff. So it's this disruption opens business opportunities for other companies. Focus on health. We realize that life is fragile. Okay, also life is short. Economic reconstruction, it's going to be easier said than done for both 2 countries. And remember that on top of that, specifically in Brazil, is piling up debt because of this grant to support, which is good to support poor people, right? So that level is growing very fast in many countries. Food for thought. Okay, we are almost in the end of my material. What we expect and we need, and I guess in many other countries, but for specific Mexico and Brazil, a better coordination, local versus national level. Okay, we live in cities, right? Sometimes the idea of a national government is an abstraction. Our lives happen in cities. So maybe after this COVID, I guess, and we started to see some evidences that power may be shifting and people are opening their eyes to local governments more than like federal government. We realized that those guys, they kind of failed. But our governor allowed us to get our vaccines faster than the federal government. Okay, in this case, is very clear in Brazil. Also, regional governance. Brazil plays a role as the big guy in South America. Okay, it's harder for Mexico to be both countries are far from being a global power. Okay, but if you want to be a global power, you need to be a regional power first. And I do not see Mexico being a regional power in North America. And Mexico is part of North America, right? But Mexico, given the size of the economy, this country may have a positive impact in Central America. Sometimes not willing to do so, Mexico, right? So the previous lecturers, they said something about regional cooperation. Easier said than done. Okay, easier said than done. When most countries in South America were run by leftist governments, there was a kind of global cooperation. It happened. We call the pink tide. Okay, pink because simultaneously several leaders were female in Brazil, in Chile, and in Argentina, and they were leftists. So they organize a kind of arrangement. Okay. And the idea of urban governance, back to the topic of cities. Yesterday, it was issued the ranking of best cities to live. And in the past was Vienna and other cities. And because of COVID, nowadays the best places to live are in New Zealand, Australia. Why? Because those smaller countries and cities were able to deal with COVID better than large open countries like India and Brazil and Mexico. Okay. Short-term winners in the post-COVID world. In Brazil, gaming, because teenagers spending more time in gaming, and Brazil is an interesting market for digital games. In-house lifestyle, beauty care, and after the COVID, tourism is recovering fast and strong. Tourism and hospitality industries, and also beauty care in Brazil and in Mexico. Sorry. So this is what I think I have to bring. I'm really open to discussion, questions, comments, jokes, gossips, whatever. Okay. So this is my link and LinkedIn. I'm an open networker, and feel free to invite me anytime. And I have this blog about business and geopolitics. Okay. So let me see. I think I have a question.
Yes, there is one question from Priyam Gangwar. He has raised his hand. So we'll take first Priyam, and then I will come back with my question. So go ahead, Priyam.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can.
Yes, Priyam.
Hello, doctor. It was very insightful listening to you. I have two questions. The first is regarding Mexico. Early on in the lecture, you talked about that there is a biggest wall of rich and poor between Mexico and USA. It is very interesting, every strong nation wants to keep its neighborhood, wants to keep its backyard stable, prosperous, and happy. But when we see the relationship between Mexico and US, it is not like that. US has always tried to keep its backyard stable. It has always fought all the wars away from North America. But when it comes to Mexico, there is a kind of a stepbrotherly treatment that we see. And I'm not aware that is there any historical animosity between Mexico and US as we see between Pakistan or India or between North Korea and South Korea. So why such relationship between Mexico and US exists?
Okay. Here we go. On the economic side, it's very intense. Okay, so from a business level, the relationship is good, and people start with Mr. Trump and López Obrador. Mr. Trump from the right side, we can say, and López Obrador from the left side. People were scared. Okay, what happened at that? Between them, the relationship was good. Okay, so there is prejudice in the United States against Mexicans. Okay, illegal immigrants, but from a business level, the relationship is good. It's better than ever. Okay, with the USMCA deal, Mexico was number 3 trade partner of the United States, and now it's number 1. Okay, so from a business perspective, relationships are good. There are some talks, and then we need to understand that politicians, sometimes say stuff they say things for the trenches, for their supporters. When Trump said things about, okay, let's build the wall, and they built part of the wall, okay, but they're saying this for his voters, for his political supporters. if you look at the actions, not the talk, but the actions, things improved in Mexico with the USMCA deal. Okay, one industry, the automotive industry, suffered, not as much as expected, but suffered, which is true. So USMCA, the whole idea of the USMCA deal is to bring back jobs that United States lost to Mexico. Not true. US lost jobs to China because of automation, and that jobs are never going back. But anyway, they put in the USMCA deal some limitations. So part of the production, yes, left Mexico and returned to the United States. But if you look at the trade deal as a whole, it was a better version. The USMCA deal was a better version than NAFTA, the previous agreement, because it involves other areas like services, telecommunications, okay, intellectual property. So, Mr. Priam, so from a business perspective, things are doing fine. From, I would say, migration perspective, it is bad. It is bad because of the number of illegal immigrants. But if you look at the legal immigrants, it's I learned only when I moved from Brazil to Mexico. There are more U.S. citizens living legally in Mexico than Mexican citizens living legally in the United States. Okay. If you think of the illegal immigrants, yes, there's a lot more in the United States. But the legally immigrants, there are more US citizens living legally in Mexico than Mexican citizens living legally in the United States. This is tricky, okay? So the border, it's very easy to go from Mexico. You need a visa, but it's easy to go. And also, I have, and again, I live in, I'm in Brazil right now, but I live in Mexico. I live in Guadalajara. There are many small cities around Guadalajara whose population, it's mostly from the United States. So retired citizens from the United States, they move to Mexico to take advantage of the lower cost. So although we read the news about politicians treating each other poorly, some sanctions, immigration, the illegal immigration under Trump was very cruel. This is true, okay? But from a business perspective, still doing fine, okay? And Priyan, you said you had another question.
Yes, doctor. Thank you for the answer. My another question is concerning Brazil. Since the 2000s, there was a lot of buzz about Brazil, about India. There was a lot of papers written that BRICS will be the dominating countries in the 21st century. And then you talked about a missing decade. So are we the victim of over expectation? And then there are countries like smaller East Asian countries that showed the double-digit growth rate continuously. But then again, as you said, that these countries are very small. The provinces and states in Brazil and India are bigger than these countries. So is it right to compare Brazil or Russia or India with these smaller East Asian countries? And another thing is, Doctor, if we see Brazil economic growth was already dismal before the corona pandemic. So this corona pandemic is kind of giving it a legitimate justification that it was because of pandemic that our economic growth was dismal. It was not because of our structural faults. So this pandemic will inhibit Brazil from taking the much needed structural changes, or will it give a push to Brazil to take the far-reaching business structural changes that you were talking about?
Yeah, let's start with the second question. The second question.
Please, Professor, would you please close the presentation so we'll be able to see you better?
Okay, I'm not handsome, but this is the best I can
get.
But okay, so,
yeah, okay.
Okay, I will start with the second question. Yes, I do hope that COVID, the problems that Brazil is facing nowadays, are a consequence of things that we didn't do in the past, the reforms we didn't do in the past. And the pandemics make the situation even worse. Okay, I do hope it's I do hope that pandemics will speed up the reforms. Okay, we still need to see this happening. We do not expect under the current president those reforms. Okay, maybe we are going to have elections next year. We do not know who is going to get the top job of the country. I'm a little bit pessimist regarding the changes in Brazil, structural reforms in Brazil. Maybe because of the next year's elections, the next year elections, one of two changes happens, but I'm not that pessimist. I'm not that optimist. I'm a little bit, I do not think it's going, those change. So to put like simply, I do not expect those major changes happening between today and next presidential election. To your first question, Mr. Gangwar, the idea that the BRICS, okay, the BRICS, interesting group. It's very different. So India, largest democracy in the world. Okay, Brazil, a democracy. China, not a democracy at all. Russia, it's something between lousy democracy and no democracy. Okay, and very different countries in the same basket, but the idea is stuck. Okay, so I do not see those smaller countries comparable to the BRICS. The BRICS didn't deliver the changes that we expected. If you look at size of economies, when the word BRICS, the acronym started, okay, it was like China plus the rest. Okay, now we see, and hopefully Indian economy is growing to be the next China as the engine of growth of the world, hopefully, okay, which I like more because it's a democracy. With problems, I know, but still a democracy. Okay, so I do not think those smaller countries, they could be even remotely compared to the BRICS countries. Okay, big countries are way more, big countries, they not only face bigger problems, but they also face different problems compared to the smaller countries. Okay, the problems are different in nature. Okay, let me see.
Yeah. So there is in chat box 2 questions from Damini and Aditi.
Okay. So I'll start.
Damini is asking how can developing countries like India, Brazil, Mexico come together to deal with the economic fallbacks due to COVID-19, given we have a platform like BRICS. So she is asking the same question about South-South cooperation, and can regional integration like BRICS can be a way to get out of negative consequences of COVID-19. Aditi is asking how has Latin American colonialism played an important role in the modern restructuring of Latin America as a whole, especially in countries like Brazil and Mexico?
Yeah, let's start with the Mini's questions first, okay? Because the second one is like a different approach, okay? Our suggestion is that those countries like pooling their resources, okay? Some problems are global in nature: terrorism, tax evasion, pandemics, okay? We cannot solve those problems from a country only in a country level perspective only. Countries need to talk to each other, okay? So those multilateral forums, they're important, okay? Problem with multilateralism is that their implementation is very slow. We need to talk to like different countries with different perspectives, with different problems. So think of climate change. some countries still deny the existence of climate change, right? So our suggestion to those countries, try to pool their resources. Think of a pandemic, like COVID. India has a strong industry in pharmaceuticals, and Brazil has a smaller industry. We have some plans. I think in the future, Brazil is going to be able to develop its own vaccine, okay? But while this vaccine is not there, pool the resources, Mexico and Brazil, put their scientists together, develop common protocols, okay? So it's the same suggestion when we talk with startups. Large companies, they tend to do everything on their own because they're large. They have like resources. Startups do not have, so they need to pool their resources. Okay, so we are weak, but we're stronger together. So my suggestion, and again, Damini, it's easier said than done. Okay, it's very easy for me in Brazil to say, okay, Mexico, Brazil, and India, put your resources together. But this is the path. Okay. And to Aditi's question, this is a long question. Well, actually, the question is short. The answer is long. How has Latin American colonialism played an important role in modern Latin America as a whole, in countries in Mexico and Brazil? When you say, and Aditi, when you ask the Latin American colonialism, is the European colonialism over its Latin colonies, right? Portugal and Spain, right? This is your question, right? I guess so. A lot. So Latin American colonialism, or even better, European colonialism in Latin American countries played a huge role. Okay, in many circumstances. It has to be a global South Center just to discuss this. Okay, if you let's take a look. Look at the map. Brazil is like very big, and Brazilian neighbors, except of Argentina, are smaller. I'm talking about South America, right? So why Brazil is so big and the other countries are smaller than Brazil? The territory, right? Why? Because the way the Portuguese empire, or not empire, but reign, the Portuguese structured Brazil, and the Spanish crown structured the Latin colonies. They structured the Spaniards. They structured the Latin colonies with three main poles. One is Mexico, another, and they call the Gran Colombia, which is Colombia today, which is Colombia and Ecuador and Venezuela, and another one in Argentina. So the Spanish colonies, they were fragmented in three different centers of gravity. And then they fragmented each other. And also in Brazil, it's a very uncommon fact, okay? But the Portuguese royal family left Portugal to live in Brazil. So when Brazil, the sub-regions of Brazil, they started to fight to get independence from Portugal, the presence of the Portuguese family in Brazil provide a cohesion to the country. So that's why Brazil is and opened things and plants, and they allowed manufacturing. The first university in Brazil happened right after this movement from the Portuguese royal family to Brazil. So, Aditi, sorry, it's your question is so good, and to answer it deserves like weeks of discussion. Okay, impacted a lot. Okay, so many differences because of the way Portugal and Spain manage their South American colonies. Okay. Any other comment?
Thank you.
Question?
I have one question from my side. Brazil has emerged as a global donor by the end of 80s. And as you know, the Brazilian Cooperation Agency is having lots of projects in Latin America, in Asia, and in Africa. But it is more noticed that the Brazilian Cooperation Agency is having more projects outside Latin America, especially in Africa. So why? So this is not regional integration or regional governance. So Brazil is having that vision of inter-regional cooperation more than regional cooperation. What is the reason for this, from your point of view?
Yes, and this is true. Remember when we discussed this regional power, you need to be a regional power versus global power, okay? Integration in Latin America is poor from a political point of view, from an infrastructure point of view. Brazil only is bigger than Europe, okay? So, and our infrastructure is not great, right? So we have problems with infrastructure integration, roads, railroads from a political view. And Brazil had in the past this very strong, this idea of becoming a leader, one of the leaders of what we tend to call Global South, okay? Can Brazil influence Middle East? Oh, not that much. It's very far, but Brazil can influence Africa. Okay, so in many Brazilian companies, they have businesses in Africa. I teach in Angola, for instance. It's a Portuguese colony. So Brazil had this vision in the past. This vision is kind of weakened right now, but I think it's going to return in the near future to have a role in the global affairs, bigger than the role in regional affairs. Why? Because integration is poor. We have Mercosur, which is the is the trade bloc in the region, which is not helping at all. Okay, helped in the past, but now it's a forum to discuss geopolitics. Okay, and this never-ending discussion of Brazil, of Mercosur and the European Union trade agreement. Sometimes Brazil is delaying the agreement. Sometimes Argentina is delaying. So we don't speak the same language, but we do not speak a common language. And Brazil, with this vision of having a role in the global affairs, so try to spread its influence through soft power.
Yes. Yes, I see. Okay, so any other question? So it was really very insightful presentation that you have given Professor Evodio on Brazil and Mexico, and it has covered many dimensions, not only the economic one, so it has also political insights, and very interesting political insight actually, and the social and economical one. So I have really enjoyed your presentation personally. So thank you so much for your time and all your patience also in responding to all these questions. Any other question before we end? So I see also. Okay, thank you. So now, and I see also that our other guest speakers, they are still with us they are attending, they are participating. I bet they are also enjoying with me your presentation. So thank you, Mr. Mack and Professor Nelson, for giving us your time and accepting to be also with us today. I'm really thankful for the three of you